Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just have your attention, just for the usual safety announcements. First of all, just take note of the emergency exits through the back if you need to leave. And again, there's a number of my staff in the room. If you need any assistance, just ask for help. As usual, the event is live streamed, so if everyone can switch their mobiles off, and also just be aware that you may become part of the record in the meeting. As usual, silence should be observed, and if you need to leave the room, just do it quietly through the back of the room. The meeting is an engagement between the authority and the Commissioner, so there will be no opportunity for anyone else to participate. Thank you. Joseph.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like this afternoon, if I may, to begin with other business. It's kind of a continuation of our previous two meetings, and it's a net matter that it would be useful if I could dispose of it early. When we last met in public, I asked some questions about Garda driver training, and I have to say we're still unclear as to how many or what proportion of the current Garda complement are trained to appropriate levels. So it's quite a net question that I really would like to try and get to the bottom of before we go into the business of the meeting. So if you could tell me, please, how do you know you have enough of people trained? How many people are trained? How many people are awaiting training? Some information of a concrete nature that would help us understand what your risk is and what the gap is that has to be addressed.
Okay, Chair. The reality is that we have no bespoke system within the organisation that can actually establish the total numbers of people trained by rank, by region, by division, by station, who are actually driver trained. What we have, the entire system is paper-based, and it is not electronic. What we have been able to do, or the figures have been able to capture in respect of it, is the number of people that have been trained at CBD1 level, CBD2 and CBD3 level since 2012 up to the present date. Another difficulty I have in respect to that is that people would have transitioned from CBD1 into CBD2 and maybe into CBD3, so the person could actually be counted on the sheet on a number of occasions. In order to try and establish the requirement for the organisation, a needs analysis was conducted in 2019 by the Garda College, and in that needs analysis they identified that the number of frontline members on regular uniform duties who have completed CBD2 was about 2,500, and the number of frontline members who were urgently requiring CBD2 was about 481, and then the number of frontline members on regular uniform units who were required to be completed CBD2 in order to achieve reasonable cover was 565. So basically what we had is that the number of CBD1 who were currently authorised to drive under CBD1 was 2,127, and the number of frontline members on regular uniform duty who urgently required to complete CBD1 was 341. So the net effect of it is that there's a requirement for about almost 3,000 people to be trained in respect of CBD2. In an effort to address the situation, what we have done in respect of the matter is that it's three-pronged approach. The first part of it is in respect of driver training policy. A new policy had to be implemented to take account of a number of deficiencies that were currently in the current procedures that we have, and it was also in an effort as well to free up capacity within the ordinary training to allow for an integration of civilianisation. That driver training policy is all but complete and will be complete by the end of Q4, which will coincide with other initiatives that we have in place. In addition to that as well, that about a month ago, or more than a month ago, after consultation with a number of chief superintendents, I issued a directive to the organisation whereby the use of what we refer to as chief's authorisation, that was to stop forthwith, and that has created another requirement.
Can I just interrupt you on that for a second, because I think it's important for the audience to understand that the issue of drivers on chief's authorisation or chief's permission was raised by the inspectorate about 2015-ish?
Yes, yeah.
And was raised in the authority a number of times, and we had an assurance that it had been discontinued. So I guess one of my questions was, if you didn't have data on the number of people trained, is how you know that chief's authorisation has been discontinued, given that you have a requirement for people to drive cars?
How we know is because I've written out personally to each chief superintendent, and I've received a response back from them indicating that the use of chief's authorisation is no longer an issue in their division.
It seems to me that that means either that people are driving who aren't trained, perhaps without authorisation, which is even worse, or else there are cars not being driven. There's something not adding up in this analysis. You have about 15,000 members, and the numbers you've given me wouldn't suggest that you have anything like enough of members trained for the fleet that you have.
No, I accept that there are a number of people that the required training is about 3,000, and as part of the process to try and eliminate that backlog, what we have done is we have issued look to get extra personnel into the driver training centres, and a direction went out looking for those people, was issued on the 6th of November this year, and the closing date for application is the 13th of December. Once those interviews and the training is progressed, that will allow me then, that will give me capacity of an extra 3 sergeants and 22 guards to try and clear that backlog that we're talking about. In addition to that as well, what I've done is that we've had a tender out to the market for the last number. It was issued on the 24th of, sorry, it was closing on the 24th of October. That was out for 2 lots of people, specific people we're looking for in the private market. One was to fully outsource end-to-end training for ESDS level 1. Mm-hmm. That was the standard driving course, and the second part of that then was lot 2 of that was driver training augmentation to support the current driver training within the organisation. That tender has closed. A number of clarifications has been sought. The clarifications are due to expire on Friday next, 29th. At which stage then on the notification letters should be able to issue by the 6th of December. Once I have that done and coupled with the number of people that are coming into it, I then can put a cogent plan in place for 2020 with a view to try and not only clear the backlog, but to try and make inroads into the number of people that are actually required training at the front line.
And I suppose the question, and maybe it's one for the Commissioner, is what significance this has in your risk register, that you have such a gap in terms of trained Garda members to drive vehicles, particularly in blue light situations? Because, I mean, that's where this isn't about chasing imaginary problems. This is about risk.
Well, in respect of, can I say that all people in roads policing, for argument's sake, are all trained CBD2, and currently all people that are currently driving ASUs, RSUs, and those types of vehicles, and ERUs, they are all trained to CBD level 3 and beyond. So that level of assurance can be given to the authority that all those people are trained. Where we have a failing at the moment is the number of people on the regular units that we need to upskill in respect of CBD2, and hopefully that the plan we put in place for 2020 will start to make inroads. It's not going to make inroads. The difference will be that instead of training maybe up to 400 a year, we should be able to put a throughput next year of up to 1,500 a year, which will allow us then in the next 2 years to try and clear that backlog. But then that will the next tranche of people then will start to come on board after that.
There was an event this week with the Road Safety Authority in the context of blue light services.
Yes.
And I know you were represented there, and there was a lot of fanfare about the thousands of people that have been trained since that regime was put in place under the auspices of the Road Safety Authority. I just can't square this, Dave, that there's such activity going on about blue light training generally, and at the same time, really minimal progress over, I'd say it's at least 3 years since the authority first raised this question, since my colleague Noel Brett started to ask questions about it. And just, is it the best use of 22 sergeants? Is that what you said for next year to be training guards? How to drive?
Well, the problem is that the market, 22. The problem is that the market doesn't have that level of training in the marketplace at the moment, and as a result of that, we're left with no alternative but to bring in some of those people. What we plan to do in respect to those people is we bring them in on a short-term basis for a 3-year contract, and then they will be swapped out with a ratio of 2 to 1 in favour of the civilianization part.
Did you try direct employment?
Pardon?
I mean, you've tried contracting out. You're obviously going to make some decisions about that in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Did you try direct employment? Or did you even consider direct employment?
We did, but that level, the level of training that we require is not out there.
Yeah, how are the other blue light services managing? People are driving ambulances, which arguably carry very precious and ill people from time to time in blue lights, and someone is training them. Anyway, it's the risk I want to focus on. I'm really, the detail is a matter for yourselves, but there is a serious organisational risk that was identified in 2015, and here we are. Commissioner, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
In terms of where the risks are in terms of pursuit, etc., those are being well regulated. So we look to our pursuit policy, and also then, as ACCN has set out, the training that we have provided to those who can engage in those types of pursuits. So ERU, Armed Support Unit, roads policing, all of that is well provided for, and content in that. And just in terms then, there is a risk that certainly around those in the category known as CBD2, so the ability to respond in an emergency situation. To mitigate that, ACCN has set out the actions that we're taking. I think a second action further down the line is pretty close to what you were saying. We would seek a legislative change so that Garda staff suitably qualified, because indeed we can employ individuals, we can bring their level of skill up to the necessary level so that they can train Garda members, and also then with a small legislative change can engage in training them at driving at speed as well. So there is a route through this which is also an employment route and not necessarily going out to the market. And also the good thing about these jobs is, given the scale of the training requirement, they can be geographically dispersed across the country as well. So there is certainly a route through, and I know that ACCN as well has got plans in terms of an overall database, because it's not so much just the actual training, but we actually have to look to, particularly the more risk-laden driving jobs, that there is refresher training and re-examination of an individual's abilities as in effect a CBD3 driver, which is risky situations. So our paper system has been deficient for us in this, so we're going to have to move from that, and I appreciate just the urgency which has been impressed upon me, and which is very clear from the real life risks which are identified in this as well.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. I look forward to getting the policy by the end of the year.
Okay.
And also wish you well with the finalisation of your tender arrangements in the next couple of weeks. I think your point, Commissioner, about refresh is very well made. People in other blue light services have to do refresh training. People who drive large trucks have to do refresh training. in the private world. So it's not just a question of, fill in the bucket and then you can pause again. I think this is a problem that needs a system that recurs, and I suppose that's why the authority has been asking about this a couple of times a year, every year. So I think it is unlikely that it will be dropped, if I might put it like that. Yeah. So you can look forward to a few more questions. Anyway, thank you for that, and sorry for upending the agenda. I'd now like to move on in the normal way to our agenda, which is beginning with the Commissioner's monthly report, and I think Pat is starting?
Yeah.
That's going to be shared between Pat and Paul.
Great. Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, first of all, thank you for the very comprehensive monthly report. We could spend the full meeting talking about the report, so there's a lot in it, but we have limited time because there are other issues. So thank you for the very, very comprehensive report. First thing I want to do is acknowledge and congratulate the 10 recipients of the National Bravery Award. That's very, very significant, and well done, and congratulations to all 10 of them. Paul will talk to you about the police's successes in the report, but we do acknowledge and appreciate that Gardaí risk their lives regularly in keeping us safe. So thank you, and thank you to all your members for that. So maybe we'll start with finances. And in your report, we note that there was a planned supplementary budget of 17.5 million for the end of this year, and we note that overtime is currently 13 million over budget. And then you comment in the report that there was planned underspend in some current areas, and particularly in capital. And as related to the capital underspend, the planned capital underspend, that I just have a question on. We understand that some of that planned under expenditure is in relation to the fleet programme, the important issue of cars. I just want to confirm, is that true? And as it is, are you satisfied that you have sufficient fleet within the organisation?
Sorry, just what page are you on there? Because that's not my reading of it, actually.
It doesn't mention, I'm on the finance in your monthly report, and it talks about capital underspend. Yeah. No, sorry, it doesn't mention fleet.
Actually, I was getting confused because actually we have further invested in fleet this year. I think in the order of 2.5 million. So we had an initial budget of 10 million, and as it sets out, and as we have reported since August time, we took remedial action when we were concerned about our budget, particularly as we weren't entirely sure around the Trump and Pence visits. So we took remedial action. That remedial action has had an effect, and that has allowed us then expenditure elsewhere, and that has included vehicles, some further expenditure in ICT, and has allowed us to move forward with the Motability project. As you can see there as well, then, that there will be a supplementary estimate. Yeah. That's been clarified to us, and you can see the process there to be followed. But that then provides us then.
So I'm clear, your expenditure on fleet is greater than what was included in the budget in the beginning.
Yes, it's the order of additional 2.5. So the expenditure this year was to be 10 million. It's now 12.5 million. And I think everywhere across the country, when we look at the figures, our fleet is at its, in each region is at its highest level. So there are individual variances between district to district and division to division. Fleet is an ongoing issue for us, because the more we concentrate in neighbourhood policing, community policing, particularly in outlying rural areas, that also includes a vehicle, and sometimes that vehicle then is really only available to the one or two members, as opposed to a vehicle being available and in use 24/7. So that does put additional pressure on the vehicle fleet. In addition, then, I've asked for an increase in the number of dogs that we have available to us, both general purpose and drugs dogs, the money dogs. So that also will put additional pressure on the fleet for those specialist vehicles.
Okay, well, that's good news, because I thought that there was actually going to be an underspend on fleet. That's good.
No.
Just on the overtime, on the thorny issue of overtime, and despite your best efforts, there's still an overspend on overtime. So in relation to next year, have you taken any additional measures to control overtime?
Well, I think the structural issues that we'll look towards are, there are a number. Look towards the roster reform project, and what we can achieve there in terms of taking out some of the practices which have built in effect into the present roster, which incur overtime. And I'm not talking about the 15-minute briefing time, but just other practices. I think that can make a change. That'll make a difference. Secondly, then the provision that we supply in terms of assistance to the court service in a number of areas, and again that is subject of a working group within the Department of Justice, and again there's significant expenditure there. But also then we want to look at court attendance. And seeing if we can further regulate that, and instead of individual members, frequently attend court over quite simple summary matters, that we can in some way provide system around that. There are good systems in places such as Monaghan, for instance, about how that has been done, and we want to then just spread that good practice out through the rest of the organisation. On top of that, also, we are revisiting our policy around non-public duty and the assistance then that we provide to big sporting events, concert events, etc., and then seeing where we can make savings there.
Okay. And just a general question on financial information. It's a question I asked you when you took up your role. Were you happy with the information? Did you have enough information to run the organisation? And I was talking about financial information at the time. And you responded and said, look, you're happy with this accuracy, but you're not happy with this timeliness. And I was looking at the ICT strategy, which is very comprehensive for 2019 to 2023, and that does talk about the introduction of a new financial system. And in that strategy, it also talks about directing more resources internally to ICT versus external resourcing. So in relation to then if that concern is still the same, and it must be because you're addressing it through the ICT strategy. Yeah. Is progress being made in the ICT strategy to address the timeliness of financial information?
Well, if you take a big area of discretionary expenditure in terms of overtime, so 95 million, by and large, that has been reported on retrospectively, and so one can get a sense of how that budget is going from week to week, but really it's not clarified until 6-7 weeks have passed. So okay. It's almost like driving a car while spending your whole time looking in the rearview mirror. So it's not what I'd want. The RDMS system will give up-to-the-minute information, but also give us far greater clarity around where our resources are and how they're being used, and that is very significant in terms of management information around the resources that we have available at any one stage, and how we should be deploying them to make sure that that's both effective and an efficient use of the resources. And so I don't think our presence on the ground, our visibility, etc., should be a factor of how much overtime we have. We have 95 million next year, and that's it. What we should be assessed on is how well we use that, plus the rest of our salary bill, to make sure we provide an effective service.
Okay. And just on the ICT, do you think you're making sufficient progress on ICT? I know something we spoke about privately before this meeting. It's a big issue, a big challenge within Garda Síochána to have fit-for-purpose ICT systems, some of them standalone, most of them talking to each other, integrated to each other to give you the information and efficiencies.
Well, you'll see within the strategy just how much work we've set out for ourselves over the next 2 to 5 years. There are big ticket items in there. I've mentioned one, the RDMS system, in terms of just managing our staff and all the costs around that. That will remove a layer of bureaucracy in terms of the paper recording of overtime, etc., and allowances. So that's to be welcomed. The investigation management system, putting that onto an IT platform, that's very important. Around the supervision of investigations, but also seeing how effective they are, but also then looking for link series, and that's and we can see crime types where that'd be particularly useful. So we have all sorts of link series crimes around drug intimidation, attempted murders, etc. To be able to link series those would be very tactically important to us in terms of investigation, but other areas as well, such as insurance fraud, etc., where we can find the same individuals, the same vehicles, maybe across a whole region. So these are important advances for our effectiveness. Command and control has arrived. command and control, we move on to the next stage pretty quickly, and that'll give us a lot more management information around.
And it is great to
demands
see
being placed upon us.
the projects up and running and hopefully
Yeah.
being launched successfully. We'll move on to ethics, and you'll be glad to know maybe this is the second last time we'll be asking you about stats. They have improved, so well done on that, particularly on the Garda members. So just the question, I suppose, when are they going to be complete? You're up at 93%, 92% have signed. This is the training in the Code of Ethics and signing on, certifying that they will abide by them. Less encouraging are the Garda staff. The numbers are down there. The 60 is 64% and 61% signed. So maybe a general question, how are you addressing the Garda staff, and when do you think it will be almost off the agenda from these missions' point of view?
Well, we continue to, I think, advance and take this forward. The Code of Ethics now is an integral part of the decision-making model. The decision-making model will be reinforced throughout the organisation, and that has landed and has landed well. In terms of the Garda staff, in part, I think we have to say we've missed a trick in terms of the induction of new staff. We have recruited a lot of new staff, and we've missed an opportunity there. But going forward, particularly as we're recruiting Garda staff for more and more specialist roles, induction is going to be a very important part of that, and we'll want to catch up on that. And also then, we have made it clear to all the commands and all the branches and divisions that the Garda staff should be a priority in terms of getting to the training, and you can see the take-up when they get to the training is 95%. So, they are very positive when they get there. In terms of the training they receive. And overall, I don't think there's a culture of resistance. I don't think there actually would, it would have been said to me upon my arrival, you have a culture of resistance to the Code of Ethics. I don't think actually that's the case. We've carried on with this education process. And some might say, well, yes, you've twisted their arms because you expect it in terms of promotions or movement to specialist roles, etc. But I think that is a fair enough strategy on our point, because the Code of Ethics plus human rights is central to our decision-making model, and all of us have to abide by that.
And look, and we were very pleased to see that at the centre, and we spoke about that many times. And just while we are talking about the Garda decision-making model, that's been approved, it's been rolled out. But I suppose a little bit disappointed to see that is now the online learning module is just being developed now by the Garda College, even though people need this information and training now. Code of Ethics is central and human rights to every decision a Guard makes. So is there not a bit of a lag on the training on that one, which is a bit unfortunate?
Well, perhaps only that, and I think the one thing I wish to highlight is that we seek in all of our training to weave the Code of Ethics into that, because the decision-making model is central to so much of the training that we're engaging upon. So you go on a whole range of operational courses where you are expected then to be in a position after that course to be able to make pretty important operational decisions, and that would be, say, in a protective services role, right through to firearms type role, right through to management of public order incidents. Your ability to work your way around the decision-making model is central to your competence.
So you've covered it separately.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. On the culture, first of all, we asked you, and you delivered on your vision for a culture for An Garda Síochána, and you showed us that last June, and now you've communicated that through the Staff Culture Engagement Charter.
Yeah.
And we're very, very pleased to see that. Very, very pleased to see that's now in every station, both in the private area and in the public area, so everybody can see. I think that's a very significant initiative, that you have your expectations out there and your, I suppose, encouragement to your people to speak up and to do all the good things that are in the Charter. So I think that's very, very significant, and very, very pleased to see it, and we welcome it. I asked you, the very first question I asked you, I think, what's on culture, what did you want to achieve? And I was delighted you said you wanted to reform culture. This is when you took up the position. And I remember we discussing, could it be achieved in 5 years? And I thought it could. And you said, yeah, well, that's your own personal plan. And just from all your engagement with business stations, when you meet people, what's your sense of the impact? Where are you on the road, do you think? And we'll talk about the culture audit in a minute, the next one.
Well,
is it on? Are we on the journey? Are we on the move?
Well, probably cultural change is one of the most difficult areas to move, if not the most difficult. And in some ways, I'm a bit of a behaviouralist in terms of this. So I think, through the Code of Ethics, through the decision-making model, through the revamp actually of our misconduct, from moving from discipline to misconduct and separating them poor performance, that I want to drive the behaviours within the organisation then, which then lead to a culture where people know exactly what's required of them, what their behaviours are and what the behaviours should be, both within the organisation and then how they are projected to the outside world as well. So I have to say, when I go around stations, I'm always impressed, and I'm always impressed with the quality of people that I meet, and they appear to me in any case, and I sit down and chat to them all to be infused by the work they do, and very much committed to public service and public service within An Garda Síochána. You sometimes hear through the media or social media a lot of quite disparaging comment within the organisation coming from some within it. But I have to say, my experience is I find people who are very committed and are committed actually to the change and understand the change as well that we're undertaking.
We do know, though, from the culture audit of a year and a half ago, the 6,000 members, it wasn't really fit for purpose, the culture at the time. And the next culture audit will be next year. We'll come back to that. But if we were to do in the morning, do you think it would be more positive from your members' point of view? They would be saying more positive things about happy, safe environment to speak up, to share information, and so on?
I would hope so, but I think there's more to do there. As we set out, and we'll want to present to you soon just the developments that we've taken in terms of developing a culture or behaviours around anti-corruption in the organisation. Part of that speaking up and the additional supports that we want to put in place. So although we've signed up to various charters, etc., around speaking up as an organisation, I think there's more that we wish to do there, and AC Shane is leading on that. A lot of that work has come to fruition in terms of policy and resourcing of that, and we want to bring that back to the authority to supplement, I think, the briefing of the summertime of June in respect of that, and that would be an important interaction.
And we do note and we recognise your actions, and you mentioned a lot of them there that do have an impact on culture, so we do appreciate that. And the next culture audit hopefully is going to be next year. Your people tell us it's going to be next year.
Yeah.
The key thing of that is probably going to be a different provider, is that you will be able to measure trends. It's critically important to be able to see what progress is made since the last audit over 2 years to next year. So whoever is doing it will be told who's probably going to be doing it. That'll be incredibly important that we can measure the trend.
No decision been made about the provider. The options are being explored, but no matter who we get to do it, one of the provisions would be they need to actually be able to give us some continuity in what they examine. So we can see what the trend is over time.
And we'll see it next year, which should be good.
Yeah.
My last question, and hand over to Paul. Little thorny one that I have a hobby horse of mine. I was going to say horses. Uniforms.
Yes.
We noticed. I looked at the estimates for next year and your submission, and you looked for 8 million. If I remember, 8 million euros to introduce a new uniform. And I understand that is not in the estimates now for 2020, which is disappointing because it would be a big win, a quick win. It's something that your members felt strongly about. That they need a uniform that is fit for purpose, that does the job, that they look well in. Look professional as possible, and every organisation looks at the uniforms from time to time, and it's well past the time, I think, to do it. So,
we are in a position of, we have selected what the uniform would look like. We're now exploring then the tender options for that. It is yes, in one way it is a quick win, but it's a quick win with quite a price tag. And we want to make advances this year in terms of the tendering and supply of the uniform, then with delivery in effect in January 2021.
It's not in the estimates for next year.
There's not the estimates for next year, but that's not to say we can't, in effect, do the groundwork for the delivery to arrive. And in effect, actually, we can make use of to our advantage in terms of having that longer period of time, and that gives a longer lead-in for some of the real mega suppliers and
look forward
to be able to contract
Thanks,
this as well.
Thank you.
Just before I hand over to Paul, just two pieces that Pat's conversation with you, Commissioner, reminded me to mention. And taking your point about behaviour, you know, the authority has been concerned to understand better how victims engage and how the victims experience. So we've just to advise that we've commissioned a piece of research around the victim's experience of their engagement with the Gardaí, and we hope to award that next week, I think, in the next week to 10 days, and that'll be progressing into next year. And
might I also add that we are extending our public attitude survey so that we have a better base on which to report on the victim.
That's really welcome.
Experience as
That's
well.
right.
So
Yeah.
obviously we've received the authorities' feedback on that, and we're acting upon it.
No, it's really welcome because the base was really tiny. And the other point I had should have thought of sooner. The anti-corruption point that you mentioned, that policy I think you committed to having this year. Any chance we could have it for the December meeting?
Well,
or even a discussion around where you're
yeah,
at?
well, no, Dave presented on it yesterday there to the executive, and so we do want to be in a position where we have these complete by end of year. So I would say at the moment even they're in a position to share with the authority. So if we share them with the authority, as understand that drafts which mightn't have just had all the burnishing done to them,
sure.
And then we would be glad then to take feedback and hopefully complete them by end of year.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner. Paul.
Yeah, just one follow-up question in relation to the Code of Ethics, if I might. Clearly significant progress in relation to that and to the sign-up rates as you discussed with Pat. I just wondered, is there any evidence of geographical disparities in relation to the sign-up for the Code of Ethics?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
I can just say from the northwestern region there isn't a significant disparity in respect of the adherence to signing the Code of Ethics. And it is work in progress, and just in terms of oversight of it, it comes on every performance meeting, both at a divisional and a regional level, in terms of what numbers we are and how we're progressing. So there would be slight variations. Some of them may have to do with maybe training difficulties, because we're now down at the numbers where a number of maybe specialist units, so it's hard to abstract them from normal routine policing in order for the training element of it. So we're actually down in quite small numbers. So as I said, there may be, if you have particular specialist units located in a division, that might account for a higher, but overall the numbers would be fairly consistent across the divisions and the districts.
Okay, because that's sort of self-evidently where you might look for the last holdouts, if you like, if there was some degree of geographical disparity that caused alarm, but you seem to be suggesting that isn't the case. So, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the crime trend figures, and I know we've touched on this before, and obviously it's at the heart of what the Guards do, of your mission. So I suppose where I'd like to start is in relation to offences against the person. And there's still a sort of upward trajectory in relation to those. And I know since the last meeting you finalised the assault strategy, and that's clearly very welcome, and hopefully that will have a positive impact on that upward trend. And I suppose I have two questions in relation to that. The first one is whether or not you could outline some of the actions that the public might expect to see as a result of the rollout of the strategy in the coming months.
Okay. Well, I may turn to Orla, is the architect of the strategy there, the best place to answer?
It was rolled out to all of the divisions across the country last month, well, September actually, and we've had our first bi-monthly meeting, and the next one is due later on in December. We would expect that it's a pro-arrest policy, as in arresting on the spot as opposed to maybe going back after somebody the next day. So we expect we have that, but we also have a crime prevention piece involved in it as well too, such as visit to schools, visit to vintners, visit to nighttime economy locations to talk to people, and also then, I suppose, safety advice to people when they're going on a night out. So it's a many-stranded approach, along with the investigation of it, and it has been rolled out. And I was aware today when I was leaving the DMR offices that the Assistant Commissioner there had a meeting with all his chiefs and supers today in relation to it, and I suppose because of the large nighttime economy that's in Dublin. So we would expect to have figures and statistics.
Sorry to interrupt you,
Sorry.
Assistant Commissioner. Could you move the microphone in a little bit? We're struggling over here to hear you. I know you're answering, Paul, but we're all trying to hear you, so if you don't mind.
So we would expect to have statistics for you rolling out of this, probably coming, as I say, it's only started, so it'll take some time. But I would imagine, certainly come January, particularly after a busy festive period, that we should be able to look at it and obviously draw some conclusions from it as to how it's operating.
And in terms of, I mean, obviously, as you say, it's just the beginning of the rollout of the strategy, but in terms of a potential positive impact on the figures that we see from the Commissioner's report every month, when do you estimate that we might see an impact on those figures?
Well, I would hope you would see certainly an impact on detection figures because of the pro-arrest policy. Obviously, assaults occur, and probably if there's more guards out in the street, there's actually going to be more, I suppose, identification of assaults and guards being there to deal with them. So figures may rise in the short term, but I would expect with both the pro-arrest policy and indeed the crime prevention and the kind of awareness to the public about how to, I suppose, protect themselves, but also the impact of people are the perpetrators of an assault, how it can affect their lives going forward, particularly with young people, that they don't sometimes think the effect it would have on for vetting or for travelling abroad or for job prospects. So I think it's the combination of, like, we're getting returns from divisions about school visits, college visits, all of that, to, I suppose, not alone just the arrests, it's all about the other crime prevention that's done as well too. So we will be reporting on all of those particular aspects.
Okay, thank you. And similarly in relation to, and I'm not sure if this is your bailiwick as well, but in relation to the trend in relation to sexual offences, that's also unfortunately on the increase over the longer term. And I see that it's noted in your monthly report that there could be two reasons for that. One reason might be an increase in the reporting levels for such offences, which of course would be a positive. But you can't discount the notion that it's also simply down to the fact that there are more offences taking place.
Yes.
So I suppose my question is, how do you, or can you at this stage, disaggregate between those two in terms of the impact on the overall trend?
And the short answer to that is no, we can't, and the increase may be a combination of both. And so if we compare our figures and what gets reported to us in terms of rape and serious sexual assault, those figures would be entirely overshadowed by what would be reported to rape crisis, for instance. So we know that there still is significant underreporting, so we do welcome an increase in reporting to ourselves, because then that gives us far better idea of what the scale of the problem is, and also then that's allowed us to prioritise and direct resources towards protective services units. One of the advantages of going with the new operating model is that we should be able to further enhance that with an appointment of a detective inspector in each division, specifically for protective services units, and so that sexual assault, but also serious domestic abuse type offences, etc., are being investigated by specialists who have specific training in this area. So we want to keep on enhancing our service to victims, working with the NGOs. So it is difficult to tell what proportion of this increase is a real increase. I would say some of it must be, but in addition there does seem to be an increase in confidence in coming forward. And we would see that our experience has been that where a rape crisis centre opens up, then additional reporting happens in Garda Síochána as well. So it is the relationship with the NGOs and the support that they provide is also very important in terms of crimes being reported and then victims being supported through the criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you. One of the other significant strategies that you've published since, I think, the last authority meeting is the diversity and integration strategy.
Yes.
And I just wondered, could you tell us a little bit about how you think that's going to help you to tackle one of the clear issues that it identifies as the growing problem of hate crime, and how that strategy will help you to identify and address that problem?
Well, we now have a clear hate crime definition. before the end of the year now we have to implement a plan in terms of the investigation of hate crime. Again, this is an area where I seek to, in the first place, standardise or make uniform the approach to hate crime investigation across the whole of the organisation, and then when that's done, then seek to then build and improve upon the service. But we've worked towards areas such as third party and indeed develop online reporting. So we want reports of hate crime as well. I am concerned, and it's a concern right across Europe, about the rise of right-wing extremism. We are not going to be immune from that, and we can see evidence of it starting to lap up onto our shores. And so our response to hate crime and our response to extremism is very important, and this is an important plank in that. And again, it's an area which benefits from setting out what the standards are and then making sure that supervisors do their job, inspectors inspect, ensure things are done to a standard that is appropriate for a crime which can have a very debilitating effect on the victim, because the motivation of it is one of prejudice and discrimination. So we're committed to this. We were very pleased to be able to launch the strategy. What we have to do deliver before the end of the year is then the implementation plan, and that's within the policing plan for this year.
And what has the reaction been, or can you tell us a little bit about the reaction of minority and vulnerable communities to the publication of the strategy?
Well, I think we were overwhelmed in terms of just the very positive engagement that there's been with us, and there continues to be in terms of minority groups. And those are certainly the ones who've had, you know, a history of engagement with us down through the years. I don't think there are groups that are outside of our reach, and that's good. Certainly not evident, but when you look towards our increasing emphasis on neighbourhood policing, that's where then we start to pick up in terms of the relationships. But we are further developing our relationships with the traveller community, for instance, and that's a very important group that we have to serve and protect as well.
One final question for me is in relation to the policing plan. It seems that in the last number of months there's been an increase in the number of off-target objectives, if you like, in the plan, and I just wondered, is there going to be an effort in the next period of time to bring some of those back onto target? Can you tell us how you're going to achieve that?
Well, it's not over till the 31st of December, so no, we can bring the assessment month on month is quite arbitrary, and we were going through this over the last number of weeks, and then even no later than this morning. So there are many of those that we will be bringing in terms of achieving them before end of year. Yeah.
Okay. Hope to see progress of that.
Yeah.
I think that will be very good news, because there's quite a few important items there.
Yes.
And those that aren't, you can rest assured the authority will expect them to see them rolled over into Q1 of next year in terms of the next policing plan. So leaving them red won't get them off the list.
Nope.
Anybody else want to ask anything? Okay, thank you.
Just raise one point.
Yes, Molly?
If I might, it probably was the amplification with Assistant Commissioner McPartlin. That was the issue of when you were dealing with crimes relating to crimes against the person, and you were speaking about the pro-arrest policy. Be interested in terms of you might develop that. What's going to be involved in it? When do you anticipate it starting? Is it focused on particular areas?
It has commenced already. It focuses on our analysis service has identified those hotspots where assaults take place, and they've been delivered out to all of the regions and divisions further information, and indeed locally then they can identify their hotspots. When we talk about a pro-arrest policy, often alcohol is involved when assaults occur, and sometimes people will be asked to come to the station to make the next day to make a statement, but we have directed that a pro-arrest policy would take place when dealing with assaults.
So pro-arrest policy?
As in arrest immediately at the scene, as opposed to waiting until the next day when somebody is maybe in a more coherent state, and just so that, I suppose, perpetrators of assaults will know that they're going to be taken straight away and arrested.
How significant a change will that be from the practice that's existed up to now?
Well, arrests are made on a regular basis on the spot, but this is sort of directing that you must, it's a bit like our domestic violence, it's a pro-arrest policy that you must arrest and deal with the perpetrator of the assault when you identify them.
At the moment, it's focused on what you call hotspots. Is
Well,
it anticipated that all urban areas, for example?
Well, different in urban areas, obviously. Having been done most of my operational policing in Dublin, it would be a nighttime economy, and obviously a big nighttime economy. You get assaults like that around those places, but it can happen in other places, and obviously it can change from place to place. Depending on the time of the year, in the summertime it could happen at seaside venues or venues where a lot of young people gather, and there may be alcohol involved too.
That's great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Molly. We're going to move on now to the homicide review, which, according to our agenda, this is the final report of a piece of work that started a couple of years ago, and we're very appreciative of getting to the end of, and thank you, Commissioner, for the final report. Our conversation is going to be led by Bob.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair has said, this is a journey on which both the Garda Síochána and the authority have been, to a greater or lesser extent, fellow passengers for more than 2.5 years now. And while not wishing to re-plough old tilled land, nonetheless, I think it would be incomplete at this stage of the process not to recall the fact that this had a very unhappy beginning, and that there was a real challenge for the authority in getting the organisation to come to grips with this issue, in fending off attempts to either to say that nothing to see, move on, or we're still receiving letters late of an evening before an authority meeting which were in the nature of being warning off letters. A less persistent body of people might have been dissuaded from maintaining an interest in this, but the authority wasn't so misdirected and maintained its interest, and eventually, and I use that adverb advisedly, eventually, the Garda Síochána began to engage with this and recognise its potential seriousness. That having been said, I think that we were deeply impressed by the way in which the organisation dealt with it, and by the way in which the Homicide Investigation Review Team, once established, undertook their work with commitment, diligence, detail, and professionalism. And nothing in life is ever perfect, but the various reports, including this final report, have been very reassuring and very frank. And it's good. This is another example of an internal review which has been frank in its evaluation of issues that have arisen within the organisation. And therein possibly lies a very useful template for all such reviews in the future, one would hope so. As I said, the openness of the focus and the extensive work undertaken has been much appreciated. It was also interesting that the HIRT, the review team in its reports, didn't seek to reach for an issue of resources or of a lack of training as a reason for this. So it acknowledged that issues did exist. It also acknowledged that these issues were prevalent within the organisation. And I suppose my first question is, Commissioner, I just wonder what struck you most about this set of reports and this final report and the 21 recommendations that it makes. Were you surprised by what emerged? Was the organisation surprised by what emerged?
Well, I think the principal learning is the application of process to this. I think what I see is important going forward to this. There's a whole series of recommendations and fixes that we want to put in place. But whenever we're dealing with serious crime, and up to and including obviously homicide, I think our process needs to be in a better place. Too much falls on the weight of one or two individuals, and they in every category must get the thing right. We need to apply more process in terms of the support of peer review and then serious case review. So in effect, work is examined, checked, and that's for the point of actually making sure our records are correct and formalised, but also our investigative opportunities being properly pursued, and has the investigation itself, is it a sound investigation? And that's one of the main learning points for me, is that in effect this has almost been down to the individual and their skill, their individual skill and tenacity and commitment, and the organisation in some way is failing them, because these investigations get such focus and are of such complexity that it's now impossible for one individual to do these to the standard that is required. Even if they're working with a team, you need a process then in around them, an organisational process that supports them. That includes the IT fix in behind them. I would mention in particular the investigation management system that we're introducing, but also then changes to Pulse that we're bringing in place, but also then the application of the skills that are already in the organisation around peer review and indeed serious case review, and applying those to such cases. So there's a lot to be taken from this, and I too acknowledge the very high standard of the work of the HIRT in taking this forward. There are learning points for this in terms of recommendations, but also then AC O'Driscoll has also then delivered a policy just recently in respect of serious case review and peer review, and we'd seek to share that with the authority. It's still in draft form at this moment in time.
Thank you. As I said, one of the things that the report, the series of reports, and this final synoptic report encapsulating all of the material from all of the work that has been done, it recognises that this is an issue that is not confined to individual instances or individuals, that there is a prevalence of it. Does that raise questions for you about quality of investigation generally? Does that raise concerns for you?
Well, yeah, there are concerns, but the concerns I would have are around if we allow a systemic failure to happen, then that requires an organisational response, and I wouldn't seek to put blame on any individual in these matters, because I think people were working hard in the circumstances they found themselves. It's my responsibility to improve those circumstances through organisational support, and that, as I've said, is around IT, but it's also then making clear around where responsibilities lie, and then how that process then acts in support of those. So again, if I point to the operating model, one of the advantages there is a detective superintendent attached to each division, so a specialist in effect in serious crime management, who can draw upon then the resources of his or her peer in neighbouring divisions, but also they can draw upon the national resources in terms of assisting in investigations and making that clear how that process works, both around support but also then peer review, serious case review. And I put my faith in those processes based on my own experience, and then looking at the things I see here, and probably a comparison of my own experience of doing this work and what I see is in effect are systemic as opposed to individual feelings. It's, as I say, it's my responsibility to make sure that investigators dealing with such complex, difficult, sensitive matters have all the necessary tools and support in order for them to do their job professionally. And I think that's the issue that's writ large for me in this.
And I think it's important to say also that the report does say that despite the difficulties that it identifies and the investigative issues that it raises, that none of them was of a level which compromised the ultimate investigation generally and the effectiveness with which the individual incidents were dealt with in terms of the decision reached.
But I would say in respect of that, we're pleased about that.
Yeah.
But you know, the amount of energy we've had to expend to get to that point is inordinate, and that's, you know, that is not efficient use of the resources. If we had a better process up front in the first place, that would also be more efficient as well.
I completely agree with that. I simply wanted to make the point and not to leave it unsaid in a public forum. Issues of data quality arose, again, an issue with which we're not unfamiliar in the engagements between the authority and the Garda Síochána. And two questions, I suppose, arise from that, and that is, in this relentless process of ensuring that data quality is good and the data are reliable, how do you evaluate the kind of improvements that you think are being made within the organisation, or the responses to what emerges in this report? And secondly, by way of extension from that, how quickly do you hope that the publication of data by the CSO will be able to drop the reservation under which the material is published at the moment?
Well, to answer the second part of that question, that's still probably 24 months away, because just the systemic changes that we wish to see are in the order of that being about 2 years' work. And they've indicated to us that they would wish to see us achieve a standard and then be able to show that we are able to stick with that standard then and throughout. These recommendations will be adopted by the organisation. The Deputy Commissioner is chairing the group which will oversee these, and then we will use then the offices of our professional standards unit to do, in effect, an examination of how these recommendations are being implemented on the ground. But on top of that, if we adopt the process of peer review and serious case review, then that gives us feedback as well around classification, quality of the investigation, and all the issues that have been reflected here in terms of finishing off work, and the expeditious investigation of matters. But so there's a number of routes into this, and I think, you know, for 2019, the year that's almost past, we're going to have to open up that peer review, serious case review process for those investigations as they are at the moment now, so that we can have assurance of the 2019 year work as well.
Yeah. One of the things that the report says, picking up on the issue of peer review, is that about 200 Garda members have now been trained in investigative review, which represents a significant resource for the organisation. Do you think that referring back to the earlier conversation about culture, do you think that the culture of the organisation will be supportive of that practice of peer review in these cases in future?
Well, I think on the operating model, 19 divisional officers supported by detective superintendents. So accountability for these matters can easily be fixed. I think easier fixed than when it lay between districts, etc., where you have 96 individuals perhaps having some part of this. So I think accountability then becomes easier to fix, and no one would wish to receive, you know, such an effect salutary account of an important investigation that they had conducted. There's all lessons to be learned from here. So the culture that I want to see, and which I'll insist upon, is one of approaching excellence in terms of major crime investigation. We've done the training has been done. We're putting in place the investigation management system that allows for that, and also then we want to put in place the processes which focus on performance as well. And performance against these issues is obviously of central importance.
Of the 21 recommendations, 5 are identified as being completed in terms of fully implemented. Do you have a timescale or a sense of a timescale for the remaining 16, which are many of which, or most of which, have already been commenced one way or another?
Can I have to order just around the specific timescales there, please?
I should say 5 have been implemented. The Pulse Release 7.5.1 in February 2020 will address 5 other of the recommendations. The investigation management system will address 4 others, and then there's 7 ongoing recommendations which are being delivered under that implementation group that the deputy is chairing, and they're owned by various different policyholders in the organisation. But it would be expected that they would, I would imagine, it's difficult to put a time scale on it, and I don't like to do that because then we're tied to it. But I still think, I would think that 2020,
that's the whole point.
I think that 2020 will, well, some of the stuff is kind of maybe it's outside of the organisation's control as well too. But I think
we'll settle for the ones within your control.
I think 2020 will see most of the remaining outstanding 7 progressed to pretty much towards a conclusion.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's clear and encouraging and positive. I probably related to a question we touched upon a little bit earlier, and that is that in circumstances where in one of the most serious offences or crimes that are investigated, these kind of issues have arisen, does it generate an apprehension on your part that in other crime areas or in other investigative areas there may be a fragility as well?
Well, yes, it does. So, what are we doing about that? And I know the operating model is focused a lot about structures, but it is also about performance. It's also about the standard and uniform approach that we have right across the country. So that in effect, there's not an air code lottery to the service that you receive from Garda Síochána. And once we fix that, then we start to concentrate then on performance. So yes, it raises concerns. At the same time, I constantly see excellent investigative work, so that also gives me heart as to the quality of the work that's been done. Genuinely, really excellent work. So, I'm not entirely pessimistic about it, but again, I think it's from my part and the organisation's part to make sure those individuals who are engaged in quite difficult investigative work get the full support, and not always in effect suck my teeth about what they have and haven't done. There's terrific success achieved. I just want to make sure that success is uniform across the organisation and it's done to a standard which then that we can fix and then start to, in terms of setting what that standard is, and then look towards continuous improvement in terms of the skills and resources that are available to investigators, and also then its supervision and improvement in terms of the overall standard.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that just in concluding this, it's interesting to note that the authority engaged with this at 13 meetings in public, at 12 meetings in private discussion, at 21 meetings of the Policing Strategy and Performance Committee, at one joint committee meeting of the Policing Performance and Organisation Development Committee, and the 21 engagements at executive level between whether with the HIRT members themselves or with other areas in the organisation. It has been an intensive engagement on both sides, more particularly, of course, in the work that the HIRT did. And as I say, after unpromising beginnings, and I think the concluding comment is simply, again, to express compliments to the people on the HIRT who were so clear and professional and open in their engagement with every aspect of it, and we appreciated the various engagements with them in the reports. And one item, it may come back once more because one of the cases is live, and they have undertaken that this will be reviewed as well when it comes to its conclusion, simply for completeness. So there may be one more swing of the merry-go-round on this one. I don't mean to be facetious or by using that term, but because the issues are so serious. But we do appreciate the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Just to maybe reflect two other pieces, I think that both organisations have learned a lot. You've described how the learning in your organisation, the authority team and the authority staff have learned a lot about how your organisation approaches not just the review, but actually serious criminal investigations involving a homicide. And I'm wondering whether the process of learning has caused you to reflect on the organisation's policy or approach, maybe is a better word, in relation to sudden deaths. because we've been concerned from the outset, as Bob has said, about the quality of investigation. And I have a residual concern that if an approach is taken which presumes a sudden death, that perhaps that investigation quality may not reach the standard. And I did notice recently in one of your press announcements, you actually announced something that had just happened as a sudden death. And I did wonder how you can be so sure.
And thank you, you did bring that to my attention. I did pursue that through. So I think this comes back to, one, there's almost a behavioural piece about the descriptions that are available to individual members when they approach something, and the expression sudden death is almost meaningless in terms of our approach to what could be a suspicious situation surrounding a death. So we are very conscious of that. It's laced within these recommendations about the labelling and the approach, but also then within the policy that's been developed, that the first thing in approaching any of these matters is to adopt an investigative mindset, and then look for is there unexplained circumstances, and things are better labelled perhaps as unexplained. It's not for the first member to arrive there to come to a conclusion as to cause, be it, and the unexplained is probably better terminology, and I know it's terminology that's adopted in other jurisdictions as well, and then that then always creates the question. And labels are important.
Yes.
And labels then do affect then the behaviours that follow on. So we are within these recommendations considering that in the policy then that will flow.
Okay. And I think you've expressed it very well. It's about how the behaviour that follows, and there's just a risk. And I suppose the other piece to reflect is, in terms of the investigative issues that were identified, I would expect the authority will continue to keep an eye not just on the recommendations, but also on questioning from time to time whether some of these investigative issues endure in new cases, because we were a little bit concerned, perhaps more than a little bit, and I imagine the team was as well, to discover that notwithstanding the iterative nature of the reports, so they've done reports 1 to 5, and they've socialised some of their findings in the organisation, brought them to the attention of relevant people and so on, to find that in 2019 there were still investigative issues with a number of new cases. So I'm not I'm looking to get into cases, we never do that. It's more about the learning, the behaviour, to use your own language. This was not a project about 41 cases. This was a project about improving the quality of investigations, and particularly, and we can forget it sometimes when we get into the weeds, particularly about victims and their families not getting the kind of investigation they should deserve. So it was a bit disappointing, and I know the team themselves were disappointed to find that they found investigative issues in new cases. So you can, I think, take it that as well as following the recommendations to their implementation, the authority will be keeping an eye as well on the overall quality of investigation, so that there's no sense that this closing the book on this review closes the oversight in relation to homicide. I think that's something you would share.
Oh no, and you know, this isn't by any means a concluding comment. We're in effect on, I would say, on a cycle of continuous improvement. So we've received this. What do we do in response to this? How do we lift our performance? What are the emerging issues that then resolve? How do we move on from there? And I think I'd like overall the organisation to think far more about continuous improvement as opposed to using the word change. Like we are in constant cycles of, and should think ourselves in constant cycles of continuous improvement. And in fact, you know, should be restless souls looking for the next thing that we need to be proactive about and deal with.
I have no doubt we'll help you with that.
Yes.
Now we're going to move on to the use of force, and Moling is going to lead for us on that.
Thanks, Chair. So what I'm looking at is the recording and reporting publicly on the use of force. I'm conscious that we've been discussing this at authority and indeed largely with Assistant Commissioner Jean at committee level. And it's what I'm impressed at, firstly, is that you're now looking at the use of force in the context of human rights. And I think that's an appropriate context for it. And I'm particularly taken with the observation by a policing body in another jurisdiction. It spoke about the first step to measure excessive force is to capture the use of any action deemed as force, regardless of whether or not it's excessive. So that brings into focus the issue of what we record, when, and indeed how we report it. So if I might, maybe just a couple of, seeing as this is a public meeting, if you might share with the authority, firstly, the extent of reporting, of recording currently of the use of force at a local and then at a national level, and the extent to which it's assessed and analysed, and then we can look in terms of the reporting of what your proposed plans are, with what you're currently doing.
Okay, well, can I look to Dave, please, and respect to that?
Okay, I suppose in many ways this dates back to the Garda Inspector Public Order report in 2019, which identified a sort of a number of issues in how we actually record use of force. And in that, the inspectors identified that there was a lack of internal governance around the monitoring and the use of force by Garda members. And I'd also identified a gap in the accountability, and they identified it as a significant organisational risk. They did make the point, as you said, in respect of other police forces that record the use of force on their website, and what we're looking at the moment now in respect of that is that we had an obligation to report the matter to the likes of the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, GSOC, in respect of certain categories. So in respect of the use of firearms, in respect of the use of taser, in respect of the use of incapacitating spray discharges, that we had to notify GSOC within 48 hours in respect of the use of those.
So you record all of those and you report them directly to GSOC. Do you record other areas of the use of force, because you quite rightly refer to other jurisdictions and the extent to which they record everything from sort of physical interaction with somebody to restrain somebody, the use of dogs, horses, various elements where the use of force may be involved. Do you have that structure or process at the moment?
Yeah, what we have at the moment is we have 8 policies that are garnered by the use of force. Those 8 policies are overwritten by an overall overarching use of force policy, which is led out by the Deputy Commissioner. The other 8 policies then are actually the policy holders in respect to those arise out of 3 other assistant commissioners, so other people own the policy. What we did as a result of the Garda Inspector's report on this occasion was that within my department in Internal Affairs, we decided to, we were asked to take on board the review and the monitoring of the policy themselves. So in other words, the reporting of the issues. So what we have done in respect of this is that we had a serious look at it. But the problem that we had, the first problem that we found out was that all of the use of force that we actually could do at the moment are actually recorded on Pulse, but are recorded in the narrative.
Okay.
So because they're recorded in the narrative, we to extrapolate the information from the narrative, it can be somewhat difficult. So what we've engaged with is a business analyst, and we've also engaged with the analytical services at the moment to try and see, can we take that information from Pulse and to inform us as to not only what we were doing in the past, but how we can move those policies forward in updating those policies in 2020.
So do I gather from that, Assistant Commissioner, that say for the past number of years that you actually don't have statistics relating to the use of force across say 8 or 9 or 10 different categories that you may be using?
No.
Or that might be used?
But what we have done at the moment, we've run a script on the narrative with the help of IT, and we've taken a period of a month, and what we're now doing at the moment is to try to validate that the results we got for the month is it something that we could extrapolate out for the whole year. I'd be hopeful at the end of this year that I would have a baseline for 2019. I'm not saying I will have to do a certain amount of work around it to make sure that the figures are properly validated, but we should have an indication or a baseline that can be captured first of all at the national level, and then that will cascade down to divisional level and even down to individual level.
So you, at the moment, the use of force that you can only be satisfied in relation to the areas that are reported directly to GSOC. Other than that, you're seeking to extract information from Pulse and get some figures.
Well, I'd say, to be honest, the main ones that we're actually capturing at the moment are the ones we sent to GSOC.
Okay. Yes.
And what we do need to look at is what we sent to GSOC is just to take that back from them now to see can we make sense of the data in respect to that, so that we get a good understanding of what we do. One of the things that we're doing through the Strategic Human Rights Advisory Council at the moment is to review all our policies in respect of the use of force, to make sure that they're compliant with the human rights directives and all of that, and you alluded to that yourself at the beginning. So that is one of the use of force was one of the policies that we agreed at the outset that we would look at that. So that is going to take place in the beginning of 2020 and probably go on for maybe certainly the first 2 quarters of that, to make sure that
so you have plans then from the beginning of 2020 to record in some detail the use of force under various headings. What will you be actually recording from the 1st of January?
What we're hoping to record from the 1st of January is the 4 areas that we have, and that's the pepper spray, the taser, impact ammunitions, which is really the use of the beanbag that stock use, and then firearms. Those are 4 areas that are within our control and that we could be able to publish on a monthly basis, and hopefully by the end of Q1 we'll have done the validation. We'll have rolled out a communication plan to all our people as well, to make sure that, because the particular directive goes back to 2010 and 2012, and we need to refresh them, and also then we need to do a communication plan out to our own people, and then to make sure that we've governance around that as well, to make sure that we're capturing everything that we should be capturing.
Can I come back to the publication in just a moment? But I'm interested in terms of the various other areas of that come under the heading of force, or the use of force by Garda Síochána. Is it your plan in 2020 to start collecting the statistics relating to the other areas?
What we need to do in respect of that, and we've had some debate around those other areas, and what we want to do is to share that with the authority in advance of making a firm decision about what it is we want to either A, capture, and B, report. Because I think there needs to be an understanding of the use of force and what that use of force means, both to Garda Síochána and both to the authority from an oversight body, so that we're in unison really in what it is we want to report. So what we have planned in the first quarter of 2020 is to have those conversations around that, so that we can firm up on our own policies to make sure that what we say we're going to capture, we can capture, and what we say we report is what we can report.
I'm sure you've been looking at what the PSNI has been doing, and
Right.
you've been looking at particularly at what's been happening in England and Wales since 2017, and you've identified the particular areas, the use of baton and so
Yes.
forth. One of the critical issues in relation to statistics related to the use of force is the confidence that you can place in those statistics. And that relates to the reporting within the particular areas and by the individuals involved. This is a challenge in other jurisdictions. It's a notable challenge in England and Wales currently. This is something that you've got under consideration in terms of how the sort of assurance and that might meet the challenge of accountability that you said in your opening statement.
Yeah, and that's exactly you've hit the nail on the head in the context of what we're trying to achieve. Unfortunately, with the rollout of Schengen in early the first quarter of 2020, I won't have access to Pulse in that period of time. Well, I've had access to Pulse to get some of the data, but I won't have access to do any change work in respect of Pulse. AC McPartlin mentioned about 7.5.1 that was going to be released in February of this year. That will do that. So I have to get in the queue in the context of items that we want to get into Pulse in respect of that. What the analysts and what the IT people have said to us at the moment is that once we get over that piece of work, we may be able to use the likes of GISC, and so when we report matters to GISC, that we have an extra field that can feed into a web page that will alert them to the use of force and how we can capture that use of force, which will give us much more clarity around the reporting and the accuracy of the figures that we want to get. And we're working with them with a view to getting that done out now it'll probably take us certainly into Q4 before we get into Pulse at that level.
And this is one to that's the particular final area I want to address, is the issue of what we might expect in 2020. You've indicated already that you anticipate from the 1st of January that you'll be gathering statistics in relation to the 4 areas that are reported to GSOC, and that you'll be in a position then to provide monthly reports on that. That's monthly reports starting when?
I'd say at the end of to be honest, at the end of 2019, and when we're having a consultation with the policing authority in respect of an understanding around that, I think we will be able to share with yourselves some of the findings that we've got in respect of 2019, which will inform our decision going forward into 2020. And at the end of Q1 of 2020, I should be very well equipped to be able to publish stats in respect of the use of force in respect of those 4 areas that I believe that will be sound and be evidence based.
So, say at the end of March, then you'll be providing us with the statistics for the 3 months earlier, and on a monthly basis after that, we'll be getting all the statistics for that. That's encouraging.
Yes.
And then the second and final part, Chair, is the issue of the other areas of the use of force, and when taking account of the challenges that you've identified, when we can start meaningfully, or you can start meaningfully getting statistics that can be collated and that can be reported in the same manner, and indeed addressing the issue of what's going to come under the heading of force, what is going to be measured, how it's going to be measured, and then how it's going to be reported.
Yeah, and I think we need to get that common understanding to understand what use of force means from a Garda Síochána's perspective versus what the use of force means from the authority from an oversight perspective.
Okay.
And there may be some conflicts in respect of some of those use of forces, and we need to iron out those before we even decide that we can progress to publish those.
Did I gather from you then that you anticipated that work would be done by the beginning of Q4? And that you anticipated that you'd then be in a position, presuming that all those wrinkles are dealt with, that you'll then be in a position to gather those statistics, and you'll have the comprehensive recording and reporting.
Absolutely, and what I'm hoping to do is that by the time the end of Q1 is completed, and having had the consultation with the policing authority, that we should be in a better idea. We should be better able to understand what it is we want to capture and why and how. And I think that we can move forward in thereafter. But certainly it won't interfere with the reporting of the other 4, which we already report to GSOC.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Moling, thanks. Just to clarify something with you, Assistant Commissioner. There have been reports in the past in the public domain about late reporting of use of force to GSOC, very late in some cases. Now, your analysis that you've just described is dependent on the data quality underneath it,
yes,
on the reporting by individual members, and so could you give me some sense of your level of assurance that when you will be doing all that you've committed to do, which I think is really welcome, and we will be getting data and getting it published and so on, and as to the quality of that data, given that the inputting is somewhere else?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the data is still going to come from the ground level.
Yeah,
and
that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, that's why I raised the issue with yourselves in respect of a communication plan, which really is going to be an education plan as well to the members on the ground to change the process. And unlike heretofore, where the spotlight hasn't been on the particular area, heretofore. I think once we start putting a spotlight on it, we're certainly going to see an uptake in the data. So I would see, or an update in the recording, and that's something we're going to have to take very seriously. So what we're doing as well as the communication plan is putting governance around it, so that in the operating model in each of the divisions, that an inspector will be responsible for ensuring A, for the proper reporting, and B, for the FSC of the reporting, so that we get it in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anybody want to ask anything? I just realised I neglected to see if my colleagues wanted to come in after the homicide review. I missed my chance. Paul?
Yeah, I just have one question in relation to that, and it goes back, I suppose, to the terms of reference, Commissioner. So one of the issues in the terms of reference was to ensure that each of the 41 investigations was carried out in a way that was compliant with Article 2. And notwithstanding the good work that was done by the review team, in fact, perhaps in light of the good work that was done by the review team, the list of investigative failures that they identified in the final report included things like exhibits not securely stored, statements not taken or not taken in a timely manner, new lines of inquiry not followed up in a timely manner, etc. Now, despite all of that, they said they didn't think there was an impact on the actual investigative outcome. But those failures very much echo some of the criticisms that the European Court of Human Rights has made in cases where they have found a violation of Article 2. So I suppose my question is, are you satisfied that the 41 investigations were Article 2 compliant?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to make that determination. We've got to a point where we've taken these investigations as far as we can. The failings that we've found, we've identified, and we've dealt with those. We have got to a point where we believe in our analysis of this, that even, and you describe some of the failings that have been identified and as far as possible rectified, there hasn't been an adverse outcome. In the end, it would be for qualified tribunal to make a determination as to whether they were Article 2 compliant or not. Obviously, concerns were identified, and those concerns would be probably looked at in a pretty dim light in some venues, and I acknowledge that. What we want to do is seek that we can improve on receipt of this document, and also then in the processes that we put in place. So those failings are far more rare occurrence than they were identified in these 41 cases. It's very difficult for me to determine, and I wouldn't be qualified, actually feel qualified to say whether these are now Article 2 compliant or not.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. We're moving on now to issues in relation to policing in the Northern Region, and Judith's going to lead for us on that. Thanks, Judith.
Thanks, Chair. Afternoon, Commissioner. Can I first of all welcome the briefing that you gave us in private session before we come into the public session, and recognise and congratulate you on the recent successes in the Northern Region, in particular charges made in the most serious of crime cases, firearms seized and removed from the streets, and large amounts of cash and drugs seized. So congratulations on all of that, and of course that's as a result of lengthy, complex and resource intensive investigations. But of course, notwithstanding all of that, there remain particular challenges in Northern Region. So could you just start with your overall assessment of the particular challenges in Northern Region and your capacity as an organisation to respond to those challenges?
Okay, thank you very much. And so we are in a position now where we have charged 4 individuals, and that pretty much closes down public commentary in respect of that case, other than to say the investigation is obviously ongoing. But overall, I would say this and other matters have shown our overall commitment as an organisation to the rule of law and working with our partners to deliver the rule of law in the Northern Region, particularly the border counties. We have a very close working relationship with the Police Service in Northern Ireland. We have a very close working relationship with other very important law enforcement partners in respect of delivery around the Joint Agency Task Force. We're now in a legislative position where we can engage in joint investigation teams with the UK, and that's been a considerable advantage to us, but we will seek to see where else we can apply that to tactical advantage in respect of cross-border crime. In terms just of the reassurance of for people living in a border area, I think again we've shown that in terms of our commitment, and that's been commitment in terms of resources. Friday we'll see a further passing out parade, and a proportion of those staff will also then be appointed to Northern Region, most significantly for Cavan Monaghan. So, and in addition, we have moved an element of the Armed Support Unit to Cavan, and that will be further supplemented by a permanent addition there once the accommodation is made ready for that. So there's a lot of work has been put in terms of dealing with border issues. I hope that illustrates our commitment that we have said, and that the actions then that have followed through have seen that. We keep on advancing, and I've mentioned the Joint Investigation Team, but also then the Schengen system that we've talked about here, the Schengen Information System. That will be a significant advance as well, particularly when we see the feature of really entrenched, difficult, organised crime, which has a European footprint. It's just not a cross-border island of Ireland issue. This is a European issue, and so our advance in terms of joining on the Schengen Information System will make a real difference there. And I know it'll not get much headlines, but tactically for us and strategically in terms of our place in law enforcement in Europe, that'll make a big difference. If I can turn to Barry, maybe just in some of the issues around resourcing, etc., and the operations.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Just I suppose in general terms, maybe a number of the observations that the Commissioner has already alluded to. Firstly, we enjoy a very good, positive, professional relationship with our colleagues in the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and in many instances in terms of general quality of life issues along the border, we're well positioned to be able to address those insofar as, say, for example, the Criminal Law Jurisdiction Act, which enables us to institute proceedings for certain offences committed in the north that are, we say, the culprits apprehended in the south, and vice versa. And we use that on a continuing basis in respect of certain scheduled offences. We would also, at an operational level, we would have operational commanders meeting regularly with the counterparts in the Police Service of Northern Ireland on a range of both operational issues and quality of life issues. That could be traffic issues, public order, general crime investigation, and that. The Commissioner has alluded to the cross-border Joint Agency Task Force, which, as you're aware, was established in 2016. I co-chaired with one of my colleagues in the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and we worked together collectively on organised criminal activities in the areas of rural crime, drugs, financial crime, human trafficking, immigration crime, that have a cross-border dimension. And in that then we would have operational leads from HMRC, Irish Customs and Revenue Service, CAB, all of those agencies, and we would publish a 6-monthly report on operational outcomes.
Okay, could I just ask you specifically, you mentioned the issue of drugs,
Yes.
and with particular reference to the Northern Region, the issue of intimidation has been in the public psyche, and in isolated rural communities there's a real fear of crime and quality of life issue. Can you say a little bit more about your encouragement for victims of intimidation to come forward, and what the response from the Guards is likely to be?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you've raised in respect of the intimidation around the issue of drug usage, and it's by and large a very underreported crime for a number of reasons, and we kind of regret that because families may feel vulnerable, and as a consequence of the intimidation, or just even vulnerable as a consequence of one of the members of the family involved in drug usage. We've undertaken a number of actions in regards to trying to support and increase the level of reporting of intimidation and reassure the public. Principal among those is that very effective action in respect of cases that have been reported to us with regards to drug intimidation, initiating a number of protective measurements to the families who have been the subject of it, and very intensive investigation in order to bring a number of perpetrators to justice. And I'm aware of one particular case in the northern region where there will be a prosecution specifically with regards to drug intimidation. But again, it's maybe to try and make the public aware of the ability of the organisation to investigate it, but more importantly, our willingness to actually receive reports from members of the public, and maybe treating those with a degree of confidence and that they have the expectation that what their report will be actioned, and also it will be dealt with the utmost confidence and confidentiality. So we're working at that, and we're also working with a number of NGOs involved in the kind of drug demand reduction area, particularly in the Northeastern Regional Drugs Task Force, around the issue of drug intimidation. In fact, I facilitated one here in the city in the whole area of drug intimidation, and I know one of the inspectors in the Northern Region has specifically undertaken a piece of work with the Regional Drugs Task Force around increasing awareness of it and the need to report it.
There's a real balance between the visible policing piece in terms of reassurance and the specialist crime operations, armed support, etc. Are you happy you've got that balance right? And when it comes to the additional resources moving into the Northern Region, for example, new probationary constables or police officers moving in, that there is sufficient supervision, support and guidance for those less experienced officers who might be dealing with really very critical crime scenes and critical violent related crimes?
Yeah. I think the issue, as you said, in terms of the resources, and the Commissioner's alluded to the number of the additional resources that have been allocated to the Northern Region, both in terms of general resources and specialist resources. With regards to the issue of supervision, we would have a similar profile of supervisors in the Northern Region displaced among each of the divisions. I suppose for me the key ingredient is probably the institutional memory and the institutional knowledge of those personnel at both supervisory and management level who are familiar with the border, and we are fortunate in the sense we would have a lot of individuals who have a long history and experience of policing the border, some of them dating back 35 years, and you know, their ability to impart that knowledge is actually invaluable to our current work. So in respect of specific operations, and as you were aware, there's quite a number of fairly substantial investigations in the area of the ATM robberies, also in the area of the issue of intimidation subsequent to an eviction, and as the Commissioner has alluded to, the recent investigation, and obviously the organised criminal action in Garda. On each of those occasions, those investigations, we've had the full support of all of the national units and all of the resources available to the state in order to bring these matters to a conclusion. And I think if you look at a number of the successful outcomes in those, it's evidence of that. So we are not short in asking for the assistance, and in fairness, the organisation hasn't been short in providing us with the resources.
Okay, probably as a segue into the next set of questions from Valerie, there is a recent EU drugs market report. In fact, I think it's just been published today, and it talks about the increasing use of violence, threats, intimidation and control in the drugs context, but it also points to young people being drawn into high-risk, low-reward activities related to drugs supply and distribution. Are you seeing young people in the Northern Region being drawn into this sort of activity? And if so, what appeal would you make to young people and to the public generally, given the extent of harm that is caused by the drugs market to young people in particular?
Okay. I think the first thing to point out, if you look at the report, it actually shows that the prevalence is across the country as well. The Northern Region would be probably representative. Some areas it might be higher than others, but we would generally as a region be represented. I suppose the issue for me is that the involvement of young people in organised crime, unintentionally through their illicit drug use, is probably the most pernicious element of it. And it draws them into an environment that they're certainly not familiar with, or their family. There was a very interesting programme undertaken in Blanchardstown which spoke about Think Before You Buy, and it was an educational programme that actually focused on the fact that the cost of drug usage isn't always in terms of the health cost or the financial cost, but also in cost to family relationships, violence, getting drawn into organised crime. So my advice would probably be a little bit along that it's not simply, drug usage is not simply an economic cost. There's a lot more very subtle costs that occur over maybe a number of years for people. So again, I suppose this kind of think before you buy is probably a very simple approach to it.
And just finally from me, we've been focusing in Northern Region on organised crime and on the threats and the real challenges, but I know there are many, many examples of excellent local community policing. Would you care to point to one or two just before we finish on this?
I suppose one example is the property marking scheme, which was undertaken across the Northern Region in respect of things like agricultural product theft. And I know that's actually also been taken up by the Police Service in Northern Ireland. We've had quite a number of successes with, we'll say, our customs colleagues in the areas of, we'll say, illicit cigarette manufacture. We've had a number of successes. Back in March 2018, we had a fairly significant seizure of tobacco manufacture in Knockbridge, and then more recently, in the last week, there was a significant detection of another facility just in Kilmurray as well. So there's a lot of operational successes that have taken place. They don't always reach the public arena, and then we have other good examples of simple cases of burglaries that we'd say were perpetrated one was in Donegal, and they were actually caught in Tyrone. Very simple things that never hit the media, and a lot of good operational successes in those areas.
For now, thank you.
Thanks, Judith. I think that's kind of an important point you made, Assistant Commissioner. It can be hard to get good news out there, but it reminded me of something that I intended to mention under the Commissioner's report. I gather you've recently prepared the victim's leaflet. We received a copy in the authority, and well done. It's very comprehensive. It's very large, and I'm wondering about its dissemination. Because this is something we discussed in public session, I'd say maybe 2 years ago. And the model that was available at the time was, quite black and white and just a typed document that people in Garda stations had to download from your own website. And it wasn't the most attractive thing to be offering to victims about their rights.
Right, okay.
It's all right, you can come back to me on it.
Yeah, okay.
They give me something for the final meeting.
I know we talked about it at the last...
I'm giving you a compliment here.
Yeah, no, I know we talked about it at the last meeting there, but I know I'll get your response. No,
okay,
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Valerie, sorry, anybody else want to come in on the Northern? So Valerie is going to ask a couple of questions on the juvenile diversion programme.
Just to pick up on the youth diversion programme, we've discussed this before at previous meetings. In fact, I think we discussed it at our last public meeting in September. So at that stage, I think we had learned that close to 8,500 youth referrals hadn't been progressed, and involving about 3,500 Gardaí, and I think the background to it considerably in the past. So really today it's just by way of updating as to where it's at. So first of all, can I clarify, is the review of all of those cases now complete?
No, some cases are in effect still live, which precludes us really getting to the final picture. I would say the great majority of the various divisional officers have completed their work. There's about 5 cases, and we know why that work is still continuing there. So not quite finished, very, very close. ACCN has some of the specific detail then of the figures we are at the moment, but we don't actually have the final figures, if I put it like that.
You're close to it at this stage. Would you like to update us just as to the headlines of where?
So there's initially there was 8,457 referrals from the Garda Youth Group that came across. As we speak today, All but 740 of those have been reviewed. Within the 740, within the 7,717 that have been reviewed to date, 6,417, which is 77%, have been identified where there's no real discipline involved. 1,134, which is 13%, are at the lower end of the discipline market, which the regulation 10. There's 109 then of those, which is 1% in the less serious discipline bracket, and none have been identified yet in the more serious bracket. As I said, there's 740 at the moment that are requiring review.
Can you remind us, in the 8,500, is that the number of young people, or would there be multiple referrals?
They're the number of actual referrals.
They're the referrals. How many young people would that have been? Do you know? How many young persons?
3,000. I'm not sure how many.
Okay, if you don't
young
have it, it's
people
okay. It's a sense of how many of these. I mean, obviously, the whole intent is to try and steer these youngsters, away from the court system, to try and correct them, or not correct them, to try and support them in stay on the right path, as it were. So, and we've discussed before the failures of this not happening.
Yes.
When you say 77%, you say no discipline was required. Could you just outline briefly why it's not a disciplinary matter? Why a failure of that degree managed to happen?
To be honest with you, I can't give you that figure today, and the reason why I can't give you the figure today is that the review was not complete. Once the review was complete, what I had intended doing, and I said at the last day here, was that the professional standards units within Garda Commissioner were going to go back out on a number of reasons. One was to check the validity of the documentation that was done, to check to see was there a consistency of approach across all divisions, and also then to check to see was there a consistency of approach in respect of how the discipline aspect was completed. The chair asked me the last day as well in respect of could we break down the number of people who were exonerated, for want of a better word.
I was just going to ask you. I did answer
could we break that?
Yeah.
Could we break down that by rank, by station? I can break it down by station, but I can't break it down by rank at the moment, because the way in which the document was constructed going out didn't give that information. So we have to wait till the information all comes back in.
Okay.
Now,
I suppose where we'd be coming from, and I'm sure you'd be asking the same questions yourself, is are there pockets of poor practice, or is this a systemic across the board sort of a thematic piece? And also, is it where in the organisation, at what level did the problem occur? So I think, and maybe it's for the next meeting we come back to it, like how did this come to happen, and then how do you stop it happening in the future? So I suppose the concern might be, and we all know we've had years of resourcing issues, etc. Guards are very busy on the ground. Is it a prioritisation issue on the very ground, and that everybody learns from each other and practices build up? Is it a middle management issue? Is it a case, and I suppose we'd wonder, what if there was a resourcing aspect around this, or a process failure around this, why didn't that information feed back up and get corrected in the sense of a revised process, or a different
Well, if
focus?
I might say, what we want to do is we came to our initial conclusions as to why this happened, and part of it was the systems failure that was addressed then by changes then to Pulse. So in effect, even before this was identified, two updates to Pulse closed a feedback loop, which meant that these matters just then didn't fall off the radar. And I think so far, 77% of individuals, members that is, have been found not to require discipline. And I think that you can interpret that as identification that this was a systemic failure, where there wasn't actually a feedback loop, or actually matters were took so long to come back that they were statute barred, and the matter then
and you
was
confident now
closed.
that if the stats are available from Pulse now, are you confident that that's on the agenda at PALF meetings, and that it's...
Yes, it is, and one can see the difference that two further editions of Pulse made to this, even in the examination. I suppose what I would look for in the analysis of the actual discipline, is there anything else of the application of discipline, is there anything else as apparent, or were our initial assumptions in the examination of the bulk data correct? So when we first reported this way back in January of this year, we were able to give a report as to why we thought this has happened, and the discipline will hopefully further confirm that, or well, it's either way. It either confirms it or it throws up some other issue, and that'll be a learning point for us.
I mean, it's thrown up a systemic issue that we've seen in some other areas as well. So how do you reassure yourself that this isn't happening in other areas of policing? I know we've talked a lot about data. You know, are you confident in the improvements in IT and Pulse?
Well, the expected focus that there is at district and divisional level around performance around these matters, the follow through there is because of the investment in personnel in this. Secondly, then the IT changes that we've made. I think another element then is just the enhanced e-learning there is in respect of this, and the training and awareness that there's been. The staffing of the Bureau and making it an actual Bureau in the centres, and now a national Bureau led by a Chief Superintendent and she has sole responsibility for this area. And then finally then the additional frontline supervision there is in respect of both sergeants and inspectors, and that we hope to increase further in the operating model.
That kind of, because I think my question is not so much about this particular area, but are there other pockets of policing practice where the same sort of issues might arise, where there's a process weakness on the ground and the feedback loop isn't there? So I'm going to ask you, do you think, as we understand it, you're introducing individual performance management, and we also know about the new operating model. Is that going to help you ensure that corporate policies are correctly implemented throughout the organisation, and give you and ourselves satisfaction that, assurance that that's happening?
Well, the satisfaction I'd be looking for from that is, instead of there being 124 administrative units with their own interpretation, you get the 19, you get more standardisation. We've set aside a superintendent with a team, particularly around assurance and performance. And part of that assurance role is in effect to be the first line of defence in respect of the quality of the work that's done, and in effect the internal governance that we put in place. Then that's supported then by thematic examination, either by the Garda Professional Standards Unit or internal audit. So, but we would expect, and it is within this new divisional structure, that they will have a focus on performance and assurance. And that would be, in effect, almost a daily run through the incidents
and how important do you see individual performance management being in the implementation of the new operating model effectively?
Well, individual performance will be important because that drives the quality of the individual interaction. And then once we start thinking more about individual performance, then we can start to think around the skills and attributes of an individual, and are they necessarily qualified for the job they're doing. And it's just not about the poor performance regulations, it's about a focus on an individual, and are they suitably skilled, and there's more that we can do to develop them.
Thanks for that. We might come back to that again, because all of these pieces are related, obviously. May I just ask one final question on this, simply because there was media commentary on the issuing of letters to the young people who basically were failed in this regard. Would you like to make a comment on the rationale behind that?
Well, there was a strong rationale put in place, and I remember saying that for the first time. And the rationale put in place, in effect, what happens for those young people, and they all had vulnerabilities. Yes, they could potentially been perpetrators in this case and should have been dealt with, but we missed out on an opportunity for an intervention into what were chaotic and vulnerable lives for young people. And therefore then there was something for us to say sorry about, because an intervention was lost, and that intervention could have made a difference. And I think it was actually the responsible thing to do, to acknowledge that as well, for not just for the victims, but also that we'd failed a second group in this, and we were very clear about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Valerie. Dave, I'm going to annoy you. I want to go back to the figures. I want to be sure I got them right, because I think you have actually provided an answer that I was looking for the last day, albeit kind of indirectly. My concern when we last met in public was that we had raised a headline here that something of the order of 3,500 guards might have a disciplinary question to answer. And that's a pretty shocking number for the community, considering you've only 15,000. So I was trying to work it down to see how many were actually no longer in the frame. So what you've just told us now, if I've got you correctly, is that, and this is cases,
Yes.
that in 1,134 cases and 109 cases, you had regulation 10 and you had less serious.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's
That's
correct, yeah.
1,241 cases.
Yeah.
But you can't tell me how many guards that is.
I can.
Okay,
Read-
that's what I want.
Read it before. It's the 644 guards involved in 1,134 referrals.
There are people now, not referrals.
Yeah,
I
there are
want
people-
guards.
there are number of members.
Yeah?
Gardaí, there are the number of Gardaí, 644 members involved in 1,134 referrals.
644, okay.
And there's 55 members then involved in 109 referrals that are in the bracket regulation 14.
Okay, that's great. So that's 699 guards that have been the subject of disciplinary action.
Yes, of the...
That's helpful. That's 699 have been the subject of disciplinary action.
Correct, and there's 740 still to be assessed.
And so the maximum outside number is 1,440. That's a big step down from the 3.5. So
Of the referrals,
do you
yes.
see where I'm going? No, not referrals.
Of the Gardaí.
The maximum number of other guards that could possibly be disciplined,
Right.
and it's the outline, is 740.
Yes.
One each. Yeah.
So if we add 740 to 699, we get 1,439. Is that correct? Or I'm getting tired now. So that's the maximum number. So it's considerably lower than the original headline figure. And that's the message that I was trying to convey for the last couple of meetings, is because we did raise a big flag, a big scare, and I wanted to try and show that actually an awful lot of it wasn't 3,500 guards facing disciplinary action.
No, that's correct. You're
So the
right.
most it could possibly be now is 1,339.
That's the most, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And possibly less if it's more than
And-
one case
yes.
per person.
Yeah.
And that's...
It'll be a lot less.
That's the outside number.
And it could be a case as well that a person could appear in two different
I know.
fields. So there will be some outliers in
We'll
respect
go,
to that.
I'm sure there'll be granularity around that when you're finished, but I really was keen to reduce
Wanderers, yeah.
that big number that's in the public mind, because it's not a number that gives community confidence. It's such a high proportion. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Just a final comment that perhaps for a future discussion, Commissioner, is the authority noted the recent High Court judgment in relation to judicial review in this area. And, when you've had an opportunity to consider the judgment, which I'm not asking you about now,
Yeah.
is just to register that it's something that I imagine the authority would like to come back to the learning from that judgment as well, because we've been very keen through this examination to underline we absolutely support and we consider this juvenile diversion programme to be incredibly important, and to the extent that this might our examination, we wanted to make it very clear it wasn't intended to damage the programme, rather to improve it. And likewise, I think the judgment raises some questions that you might want to reflect on, and I suspect there'll be a future discussion around that, just in terms of the overall quality of the programme. So thank you for that. Any other business from anybody on my side of the table? No? Okay. Well, normally at this stage, I say we're adjourned until the next meeting, and we are actually adjourned until the next meeting, because I have at least 4 more weeks' work to do and 1 more meeting to host, but it will be in private. And so this is the final occasion in which I will chair a meeting in public between the Policing Authority and the Garda Commissioner. And I just would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all those who have appeared opposite us during those 4 years. And I'd like to pay tribute to my authority colleagues who asked all the questions. Conducting meetings in public presents particular challenges. It's not normal business either for people on either side of the table. And so I just want to acknowledge that I think we managed those challenges to varying degrees of effect over the time. But I'm very mindful that our audience is the community. And so whether you watched us on the web or whether you came to one of our meetings, I hope that you got something of value to you out of these engagements in public between the authority and the Garda Síochána. Mostly what I want to do, though, is publicly acknowledge the people that nobody sees. There's a team in the authority without whom this could never happen. The logistics gets planned weeks ahead, and kit gets ferried around, and all of the branding and everything gets ferried around. A huge amount of work that gets done by the staff in the authority that nobody sees. And there's also a team down here, our technology partners, who keep us speaking to each other, hopefully hearing each other, and enable the community to hear us as well. And finally, without the OPW, we wouldn't have had these interesting venues that we've had over the last few years. So I really want to acknowledge the people behind the scenes that made it possible for us to have these engagements. And I'm sure, Commissioner, there were people on your side as well that helped with the preparation. So finally, I look forward to seeing from a different chair, independent, transparent Garda oversight continuing, growing and maturing. So from my point of view, Sinna Will, slán go fóill.
Thank you. Might I respond on behalf of and Garda Síochána? Can I thank you for the manner in which you have steered the policing authority from its inception through now the last 4 years, and your public service in doing so, and built on what is a very long and distinguished public service career on top of that. Oversight isn't supposed to be a comfortable relationship. It is about, I think, fundamentally about keeping us sharp, and steel sharpens steel. And so we have been very, very fortunate to have yourself and authority has been so proficient in the pursuit of these matters. And in the end, it's about improving the policing service that we provide the people of Ireland, and improved policing service actually means that we reduce harm, and that is a public good in itself. So I want to thank you on behalf of Garda Síochána for your contribution to that public good and the manner in which you've conducted these meetings, and indeed our meetings in private, and our frequent engagement and the discretion and wisdom that you've shown in your interactions with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.